Hey friends, Kevin Dairaghi here. I can't wait for you to hear this conversation with Justin. Our guest today is Justin Van Riper. Fantastic friend, fantastic guy. Just the stuff that he tells you, like the real life stories, the highs, the lows, kind of the journey of it, and some of the wrap up wisdom. Guys, you'll love it, right? He's just one of those guys, you meet him and you're like, oh man, I like him. He has a passion for giving and helping and coaching, and some of his advice if you're trying to break in, and some of the nice advice of how to latch on to some of those people who have been doing it. So it's great to have them. I just want to say a shout out to the vendors. We have Adam Droege with Complete Realty Services. So they do our property management, right? So they take care of all that stuff. I'll tell you, it's tough. It's tough being a property manager. It's tough to self-manage. CRS does a great job with it. So thank you, Adam and the team. The guy who does our rehabs is Jason Hudson with Red Maples Construction. So, Jason, thank you so much for what you're doing. Actually, as I'm recording this, you're popping up on my screen with the different projects you're working on. So it just happens to be funny. So we have Lois Mans with Farmers Insurance. You got to cover your assets. That's what Lois takes care of. We have Greg Mans with Upright Construction. So making sure that the outside of the home is good, your roof, your gutters, your soffit, all that stuff, siding, etc. He's fantastic, good communicator, etc. And then we also have Essex Mortgage. So Peter and Tom help you fund the purchase and also the DSCR or the back refi of these properties. So we're going through several of those right now. So guys, thank you for supporting the show here. And let's get into our conversation right now with Justin. Great to have you today. I'm excited because we get to talk to my friend Justin Van Riper. Justin, how have you been?
Doing great. My wife and I had our first kid about 8 months ago, and so that's been an amazing journey. I hear people talk about how children are God's biggest blessing that He can give you, and I think it's 100% true. It's pretty amazing.
Yes, there's moments. There's moments on both sides of that one. This is what everybody really wants to know. So, one, you've made this massive real estate machine, right? So, wholesaling, just frickin' turn, burn, etc. You've done a lot of different things in that world. You got it in the coaching space. You've done a lot of these things. And, dude, you're one of those guys who are flying, in a sense, under the radar. I think it's awesome what you made, but I also see your personality shining through some of the stuff you did. But we've been through masterminds together. Have we done any direct deals? I mean, our worlds have done deals together, but I don't know if you and I directly have.
Yeah, I actually don't know. We might not have, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, but I know our orbits have, so that's
sure.
Cool.
No, absolutely.
So, dude, there's so much I want to unpack here, but let's just start first things first. Why'd you get into real estate?
Yeah, so I mean, for as long as I can remember, starting in high school, I always knew that I wanted to own my own business of some sorts. And full transparency, that's also because I just didn't want to work for anybody, and I'm a terrible employee. I like to do things my way, and I'm not good with like rules and guidelines and stuff that don't make sense. I get that there's certain things in place that are necessary, and those things are fine, but the stuff that doesn't make sense, I'm just not good at following aimlessly. So, I knew for a very long time that I wanted to own, kind of my own business. And so I graduated college in 2010. I was thinking six was high school, 10 was college. I graduated, and there was actually a gentleman that went to my church that I was going to when I was in college, and he owned like 80 duplexes. Yeah, he owned, like, it was they were all together too. It was like a whole neighborhood. So he and a partner like bought this entire neighborhood. It was in need of a lot of repair. It had, it was really rough when they bought it. They had to evict a lot of tenants and stuff like that. And so over time, of course, they, little by little, they were getting the bad tenants out, fixing up the properties, getting, good tenants in there, cleaning up the area. He also owned a sleep study business. And so I only had a couple meetings with him. It wasn't like there was, this big mentorship, relationship, I guess, with him, but they were still impactful enough for me then to start doing research on my own. So I'm reading every book I can, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and, everything I can find on real estate or business in general. So I always had that desire. And in the very beginning of 2012, so I was only a year and a half or so out of college, I was actually working at a company in St. Louis that gentleman that I mentioned that he owned. I was a registered polysomnograph technologist. That's a fancy way of saying that I, was a sleep tech. I did sleep studies for things like sleep apnea.
Okay.
So I just ran these sleep studies and I worked overnight. So that's when people sleep, right? So I'd work until 6 o'clock in the morning. I'd, get in, it'd be like 6 to 6 or something like that. So I was working overnight, but there was some downtime in there. And during that period, I just continued to research and read as much as I possibly could. And it got to the point after, about that year and a half, where I was like, I need to just take action. Reading and gaining more knowledge is only going to do so much until you actually put that foot forward, which is something I always encourage people to do. I'm not saying to go into anything like completely blind. Like I would do some research, get a general knowledge, but most of what you learn comes from experience. So you just got to kind of get out there and do it. No course or book or anything like that is ever going to cover every single scenario that's going to happen. So you just got to kind of learn and improve as you go. But so I had been researching as much as I possibly could. I didn't, at the time I didn't have a wife. I didn't have kids. My rent, I lived with someone else. I just rented a room from them. And I paid like $450 a month. And that included utilities, everything. So my expenses were extremely low at the time. And I looked at it and I was like, okay, at this point I have enough for an entire year. I had saved up enough for a year based on my current expenses. And that's because my expenses were $1,000 a month or something.
Not that extravagant.
Yeah, it was crazy. Like, I just can't even imagine that now.
Yeah, it's like we spend that in like diapers. Like,
right, it's crazy. Like, yeah, I ordered formula the other day and it was like $900. It was in bulk, but it was like $900. So yeah, had very minimal expenses. And so I was like, this is the time to do it. This is the time to go for it. So I believe I was, 20, I guess I was 24. I just turned 24 when I, started my real estate investing business. Cause that was a thing that seemed the easiest to get into. Barriers of entry are pretty low when you consider a lot of businesses. A lot of businesses have a lot of startup capital, and there's just a lot of stuff with that. And so that seemed like the lowest hanging fruit to get into. And so I finally did it, and it's a good thing I had a year's worth of savings because it took about that long to make my first check. I think actually it was like December of that next year when we closed on the first one. It was
actually go back and just let's make sure people heard that. You jumped into it and it took that long to get the first deal.
Yeah, my first paycheck at all was almost a year. It was like I started the company basically in January of 2012, and then it was December of 12 when I got that first paycheck.
We've had a couple of guests talk about that. Like, when you leave the two, you're like, oh yeah, I'll start getting money immediately. I'll be rich. And you're like, nope. There's a whole business you got to build while you're doing that. It's not like you're going to get another paycheck next month. Right. After. Realistically, I think 3 to 4 months for some of the marketing to actually take place, even if you know what you're doing, still takes a couple month process before you get paid in most scenarios.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, even with my experience and my contacts and everything, even recently, I ramped something back up, essentially. And it did take probably 2 to 3 months to get that first paycheck on something that I was experienced in. So yeah, you're not going to be getting paid. You're not going to just be like, oh, I'm going to quit my W-2 and then just like my W-2, I get paid every 2 weeks. You're not going to get a paycheck in 2 weeks unless you're extremely lucky. But for the most part, it's going to take a little bit. This is a business. And what business do you expect that you can start and immediately be profitable? as I mentioned earlier, I do think that real estate is a great way to do it and has very low barriers to entry. And I think that your first payday is a lot quicker than most other businesses, but it is going to take some time. You're not just going to immediately make money from it.
So I think too many people think, A, it's going to be super fast, that the deal is just going to line up, silver platter, here you go. And it does happen. Some people do stumble into a dream deal early on, but it's not uncommon. Think of the people in our close group here. Lost money, broke even. Like, that's a very common and real thing, but it's the idea of keep going. But here's my question is, it took 12 months to do the first deal. What was going on in those 12 months? Was your family supportive? Were your friends supportive? Did you have gut check moments during that? Like, what am I doing? Like, tell me your mindset there.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think if I were in a different, space of life at the time, like for instance, right now with a wife and a kid to support, it would have been a much different. But I was young, I was, fresh out of college, and with my expenses being low, now there were times, which I can get to, that I have been very worried and stressed out in real estate. But initially I wasn't, because I was like, oh, once this closes, it's going to be a really big payday. It ended up, being probably half or a third of what I thought it was going to be. But, it was still enough to give me kind of a proof of concept. I was very fortunate. My dad actually funded, so it was a fix and flip that I did, the first one. It wasn't like a wholesale deal, it was a fix and flip. And my dad had, money in a retirement account. And I had, over the course of months, just try to regurgitate everything I had learned and show him, how this is possible and how, we can make money on it and everything like that. So it wasn't just like immediately, hey, I need $80,000, which, by the way, Florissant house, a 3-bedroom Florissant house, bought and rehabbed for like less than $70,000, which is unheard of in today's market.
Yeah, those houses now are like around 200.
Yeah, 250. So that was the first one I did, and I looked it up the other day, and I think it's worth like 250 now. Which I'm like, man, if I had just kept that, I was in it for 70. It's another lesson that if I could go back and do things over, I would have kept a lot more properties. Would have kept a lot more. So I was very fortunate there. He was supportive, and I think it was partially too because like he saw how motivated I was. I was putting in the work. I was doing as much research as I could, and I was working hard. And he had seen that, kind of my whole life, and that's why I think he felt comfortable with doing it. And so he was able to fund that. And so if you want me to get into more stressful times, I certainly can. But I was actually, I would say, decently calm during that period. But that's also just because I didn't have a lot of responsibilities at that time.
Yeah. So when did you switch? Because you're automating basically wholesaling now, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I wish I could say that. So that was the goal. And that might segue into a time actually even very recently of, a low point and a very stressful time and experience for me. So my wife and I, found out she's expecting. And so I'm like, okay, cool. I've got this, wholesaling business going pretty well. And I want to try to automate it. I want to try to get other people to, kind of do the vast majority. And then I just kind of work from the outside and basically that, 50,000 foot view or whatever, and not work in the business, but work on it and from the outside. And so I actually spent like 7 months trying to train a couple people to be able to run it. So then when baby was born, and I also knew those first the first month, I was just not going to have much time, going to be very sleep deprived and everything. And so I knew that point was going to be pretty difficult. And so spent all this time and all this money trying to do this. And it might just be me. It's not the first time I've tried to scale and hire people. And it's never worked out very well for me personally. So that's just, something that I'm sure I'm doing things incorrectly because I know there are plenty of people that are able to automate. So I had spent all this time and effort and money. When I started this, I had plenty of money in savings, but over the course of 7 months, I don't think they did a deal. And so my revenue just went like this and my expenses went like that. So it was, the perfect storm of, then my daughter was born and, we have all these hospital bills and, expenses with her. And so it's just like this perfect storm of so many things happening at once that all of a sudden, she had been around for, a month or maybe 2 months or something. And I'm like broke now. Like I know I can always go back and make my.
What'd you do to me?
Yeah, I'm like, this is a weird feeling. I am like broke. And so I just stripped everything, down. I'm like, I just had to let those people go. I tried to give everything I possibly could to make it work. And I put in so much time and effort, but it just didn't. They weren't, doing deals. And so I eventually just had to cut ties and go back to doing everything myself, kind of go back from square one. And that's the period where it took me like somewhere between 2 and 3 months from me like ramping up to when we actually had a closed deal. Cause I think it took like a month to actually get one under contract with a buyer. And then I think it was a longer close. It was like a DSCR loan and they needed like 30 days. So it took me a couple months, but man, I was like sweating bullets during that time. Like felt like, what kind of father am I that I can't, provide for my kid? And so it was just it was a stressful time, which I look back now and makes me sad and regret, because I've heard people say how, your kids are only going to be that age for that time period. They're never going to be that young again, ever. They just keep getting older. And so that first couple months when she's this tiny, like cuddly baby, I'm just like in the back of my head constantly thinking about like, I need to be working, like I need to make money. I'm just like constantly thinking about money instead of being able to fully enjoy this beautiful gift that, we had been blessed with. So it was very, very stressful. And then doing it myself, like then I ramped up and started doing a lot of deals again. And I'm doing it solo right now. So I don't really have anybody that's working, but I'm still doing a pretty good amount of volume, doing quite a few deals. And, I work a lot. I will say, like, obviously I want to get to the point where I can hire more people and take things off of my plate. But, I'm at the point now where making quite a bit of money, which is great. It was just, 6 months ago was a very, very stressful time for me. And this is from someone who's been in real estate for like 13 years.
And that's where I think people forget, like, just because you quote made it at one point doesn't mean it's still going to be there. And that's kind of like the ebb and flow of being an entrepreneur, right? You have those good days. I remember, we used to do these live events, View 17, all this stuff. And some of the people came in, they're like, yeah, we got into short sales. We made more money than I've ever seen or that people heard of in a short period of time. We thought we made it. We stopped. That money's gone. Like it's one of those, like now we have to do everything again, but it's like now we know it's a business. You have to keep working it. You can't just step off. It's like you're driving down the highway. It doesn't matter what speed you are. If you stop the gas, it's going to slow down and stop. Or are you primarily wholesaling? Or are you picking up rentals or
Yeah, I am right now primarily wholesaling. I always say this, but like I need to start working on the rental portfolio. And that's something like to your point. Yeah, you're 100% correct. Like if you have a wholesaling or fix and flip business, you just stop, like the money stops coming in. And when you're making really good money, you get a little more, cavalier with like spending and stuff. Cause it's like, oh, I worked really hard and, I made all this money. We've got plenty in, checking savings and retirement, all that. We're really good. And so you spend a little more lavishly, nothing like crazy. I'm not talking about Lamborghinis or anything, but you just tend to spend a little bit more. And then if you stop, then that income stops coming in, which is why I hope if anybody's listening to this, and I mean, it doesn't matter what age you are, but especially if you're younger. Like I said, I've been in real estate for 13 years. And if I would have just focused on buying rentals, essentially, I would be retired, like fully retired by now. And, doing very well if I would have just made that my focus. it is nice having some income come in, even if you're not making that much money per month. If you get, say, a 15-year note on this rental property in 15 years, it's 100% paid off. And then you can keep it paid off. And now all of a sudden your income has gone up quite a bit because you no longer have a mortgage payment to make. So now you're cash flowing a lot better. Or another strategy that I really like is do a cash out refi. So you can do a cash out refi typically up to like 75%, maybe even 80% of what the property's, worth. And the cool thing is, since it's a loan, that is tax-free money that's coming in. So, if you have a $200,000 property is worth $200,000 and you can take 80% out of that, that's $160,000 check, wire, whatever that the bank's going to give you. That's 100% tax-free, which is pretty cool. And that's from just literally one property. So I would definitely recommend that to anybody watching this wants to get into real estate. The wholesaling stuff, it's sexy, right? It's sexy. You can, make $5, $10, $15, $20,000 like that. You can do it quickly. You've got pretty low risk because you never actually own the property. See all these advantages of it. Probably have seen on social media about, some of these gurus out there, flexing with their nice cars and watches and stuff. So it's the rentals. It's a lot less sexy of an option, but long term, it can be really beneficial. So that's one thing that if I could go back in time, I would have kept a lot more rentals. Because if I got 15-year notes on them when I bought them, they'd be pretty much paid off at this point. And if I would have had, even 20, which is not a crazy number. It's not that hard to get, 20, but even 20, all of a sudden, like I'd be getting a cash out refi, check for a very sizable amount.
You're also assuming that the rentals are going to pay and everything's good. And I mean,
oh yeah, no. I'm not saying that,
that world doesn't always work like that.
No, 100%.
I'll give you some of my tenants.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that, rental properties are the end all be all, but I definitely wish I would have, done a combination, I guess, of keeping more, properties, stayed in real estate. So then I'm, making my active income, that I'm living off of from, wholesaling and fix and flips and that type of stuff. But then that's more of like kind of a retirement plan down the road on those like kind of cash out refis.
You've mentioned so many wonderful things already. So one, you talked about those Florissant houses early on in my neighborhood. Like when I was growing up, when I said, "Oh, I'm going to be an investor," my family was like, "You're not going to find any of those houses around here." I ended up doing 3 in that neighborhood, right? So I was like, take that, right? But I could have bought these 2 in the same area, same court. One was 79. Like they wanted in the late 70s, right? 77, 79, something like that. I'm like, oh, what are you guys crazy? These are worth maybe 115. Like I can't buy it that high. You guys are nuts. That neighborhood's now in the 300s, and I'm like, but you don't know what you don't know. Like the idea of appreciation is a real thing. And, we watch Florissant, some other areas, especially when outside investors coming in. It's awesome. Like there's some areas that I think are like no fly zone, like Castle Point or, something like that. And now those are going retail prices breaking 100. And it's like, wait, what? Do you know where you are? Like sometimes it's bad when you do know some of the areas a little bit more intimately, because we're biased, right?
And it's also hard because you and I have been doing this for long enough that we know what the prices used to be. So in our head, we're still equating. I a long time ago got rid of the $40,000, price point in Florissant. I know that doesn't exist, but there's other properties that still I'm like, I can't wrap my head around how they're going for as much as they are now. It's crazy. To your point with appreciation, that's a cool thing about real estate. People are always going to need somewhere to live. Always. That's not going to change. So I mean, it's historically been proven, right? Real estate appreciates over time. You might occasionally have some dips. 2008, it dipped down for a couple of years, but it came back. It came back. I always tell people too, you only lose when you sell. Only lose if you sell the property. That's the only way you're going to take a loss. If you never sell it, you won't take a loss. Yes, you may have some of those bad tenants. You may have to do some evictions. You may have to put some work into the property. And so, you may not like the situation that you're in and may you had to put too much into it to get it rent ready again. And you're like, man, I hated that experience. I'm just done with it. I encourage those people to stick with it, because you literally only lose if you actually sell.
So this is one of the questions that I like. I did a talk on a previous podcast about Eads Bridge. Eads Bridge is here in St. Louis, connecting east and west over the Mississippi River. At the time it was made, it was post-Civil War. I don't know how much of a history buff you are. I am.
No.
So 1 in 4 bridges were collapsing, right? The dream, right, was connect east to west, sea to shining sea, etc. But the materials at the time were wood, stone, and iron. And those materials were not able to get across the Mississippi, right? Over a mile long, had to be tall enough. The river was so strong, currents, etc. So then what really had to happen was the forging of iron to steel. How do you do that? Heat, pressure, additives going in, take out impurities, right? Simply stated what a forging process is. But the analogy there is with the idea of steel, we're able to do much more amazing things. But it's those hard times, the character building times, the pressure, all the stuff, which it sucks getting rid of habits or things that you like doing and then adding in habits you don't like doing, like working out or reading or, like being diligent. Knowing the state of your flocks in a sense. So for Justin, you talked about one little dip there, but what was really a big forging moment for you? So you had a year before having a deal, but because your footprint was light, that wasn't as crazy. And it sounds like you had some support. You watched your bank account go low with the process. I mean, think about what you did in a year. You moved, you got married, and you had a baby. That's a lot of stuff going on in your life. Just outside looking in, Justin. But what was that your big forging moment, or was there something else in your life that you're like, you know what, I'm going to choose to do it this way?
I think there's, been quite a few times over the years, some moments maybe bigger than others. That one obviously was recently, and I've been doing this for a long time now. So, there are other points. Man, I wish I could remember what year this was.
We're not fact checking, so just
it was 1975.
Yeah,
no, it was a handful of years ago. It was probably close to a decade ago now or something like that. Bought 2 fix and flips, basically at the same time. They weren't side by side or anything. They were in completely different areas. I purchased those very poorly, so I underestimated the rehab too on both projects. On one of them, I had gotten a quote, from a contractor, and he was just way too low on what his number was. I mean, a third of what it should have been. I mean, he was insanely low on the bid. And I, at that point, hadn't done enough rehabs to, not just go by his word, essentially. Look at him and be like, okay, that sounds about right. And so that was those 2 projects were that was one of the most stressful times. One most recent one was also up there. But I had enough moments like that previously that even on this last one, I kind of still knew stress and everything. But in the back of my head, I'm like, I know I can go back. If I just start working hard again and doing stuff myself, I know I can make money. So there was always that, thought that I'm like, I think we'll be okay. At this point, I didn't have, necessarily that kind of fallback, I guess. And so the rehabs were extremely underbid, and I ended up having to, and then the contractor's just not doing work. So I have a hard money loan on this property. And this is I think the loan was for $250, $300, something like that. It was a little bit of a higher end property. So the interest payments are a lot on a loan that size. Every time I go to the property, I'm like, they're not making any progress. And so I was a little gentle, at the beginning, hey, I'm not seeing any progress. Can you give me updates and everything? And eventually got to the point where I kind of just went from being Mr. Nice Guy to, hadn't seen any progress in 2 months or something like that. And I just exploded, went off on the guy over the phone. And he actually took it very well. And, after we hung up, he ended up calling me back or something the next day. And he's like, yeah, you're right. This, because I'm spending $3,000 a month on literally just my loan, not Didn't have anything to do with the repairs, but the loan, I'm spending like $3,000 a month. So every, day that you're taking extra costing me a lot of money. He called me and apologized, and they went back and started, working on it again. And eventually I just had to, it still wasn't working. It was, maybe slightly better, but it was not great. And if you ever have to switch from one contractor to the next, to, the total amount to be a lot more than you expected, it just seems to always work that way because they want to fix all the stuff that the one contractor did wrong that you've already paid to have done. So eventually got the property on the market, the rehab. I mean, I think the process was over a year, I'm pretty sure. And it took like 8 months or something for the rehab alone, which was supposed to be 45 days or something like that. Took like 8 months. I'm paying interest, crazy interest this whole time. Then the property goes on the market and sits.
That's the worst feeling.
We had a ton of showings initially because it's in Webster Groves, popular area. I had a ton of showings, and I didn't have a garage, and so it had a shared driveway. There's a lot of things where I'm like, why did I ever purchase that property? Just because it was in Webster Groves, and I'm like, and there's a lot of really high comp sales, but those types of people are also looking for specific things, and they're not going to just be okay with having a shared driveway with no garage. Where the neighbors are right next to it. It just that the house had literally at one point got moved 2 streets over.
Really? That's cool.
Fully moved. So I just can't imagine picturing some big crane type thing picking up a house and moving it. But they literally had it moved, which then also there was warping in the floors. There's just all this stuff that it was a terrible buy. I should have never, purchased it. And it sat forever. And dude, so on that property lost $100,000, lost $100,000. And that, by the way, that was not money that I just I had, $500,000 sitting in checking account. And so it's whatever, I lost 100, I still have 400 left. No, in order to complete those jobs, I had to get credit cards. Oh. So I had to get all these credit cards, got between, I don't know, 8 credit cards or something like that. I got, I don't know, $60,000 or something. And I needed that money to finish the rehab because I wanted to make sure the contractor got paid. I also needed the job to get done so we could sell it. But I wanted to make sure, the contractor got paid. So everybody else got paid. Agent got paid who sold it and everything. And I lost $100,000 on that deal. So for a year, I was stressed constantly. What got me to look into the credit cards is there was another time where I'm looking at my bank account and all of a sudden, I'm checking it out pretty much daily because it's low and it goes negative. And I'm literally negative. I didn't have any money. And so that's how I had to go to the credit card route, was to just be able to simply fund the rest of the rehab so that I could survive. So yeah, I think that probably was 2004. I mean, I had been in real estate a couple years, I think, at that point. It was a while ago. This is probably a decade ago. But that was a incredibly stressful time. And what it taught me actually, I pretty much rarely ever do fix and flips even now. But what it taught me was I did well with wholesaling. Why did I ever stop doing that? And so I think that's the biggest lesson is if you've had success with one thing, stop chasing the shiny object, because I'm making 10 grand on this house by wholesaling it. I could make $50,000 if I just flip it. So that's how kind of went through my head, right? Is, I can make more if I rehab these things. So after I got done with those projects, I was done. I'm not. So the way forward after that is I was I still want to be in real estate and I still know that, real estate does well. Because I think there's plenty of people out there who would have quit at that point. You lose $100,000 that you don't have. And, it's tough. It was hard. And so I had to push forward and I just had to change. So that's a big thing too, is adapting. If something's not working, you just need to a lot of times pivot a little bit. I realize I'm like, fix and flips are not for me. I like wholesaling. I like, dealing with people. I like dealing with like buyers and working out deals and stuff. And so I like that component. There's a lot of communication, with it, as opposed to like a rehab job where that's just not as appealing to me. And I get like, you take an ugly house and make it look beautiful and it's, it looks awesome at the end. But I don't love, dealing with that whole process and contractors and picking every little thing out and all that stuff is, just not my cup of tea. I like the wholesaling where I get to interact with people and help them as well. Like, I work with a lot of people where they've never bought in St. Louis before. So they reach out to me and I can help them. I can, steer them in the right direction. I give them any connection that they're going to need. So whether they need property management, they need insurance, they need, properties, lenders. That's obviously a big one. Whatever they need, I, help them. I'll give like referrals. And then, I run all my comps from the MLS. And so I, walk them through the whole process and do some hand holding and stuff. I like that because there's a lot of, communication. So that was a massive turning point for me. I went from being extremely stressed to finally getting these properties sold, but I'm back to, I got all this credit card debt. And so went back to, wholesaling and, had to pivot to that. And so, and a couple other things I've done with wholesaling too. So my specialty, which there's not very many people that do this, but I wholesale without doing any seller advertising. And I have for a while. And 95% of other wholesalers, that's what they focus on, is they focus on doing the seller advertising and getting a good deal. That's what, they're focused on. So then I can partner with those people who they just spent, $5,000 on their marketing. They had to talk to 40 different sellers. They had to do all this work just to negotiate a deal, do contracts, blah, 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 just to like get the property under contract. So then they don't want to turn around and do all the work on the back end to sell it, because the way that I run things is very time consuming, but it's very effective. And they don't want to go through all that because they've already spent a ton of time and effort. So that's what I figured out my niche was just, hey, let me bring the buyers, let them do what they're good at. And then I'll do what I'm good at and everybody's happy. And so I do that with a lot of other wholesalers who most of them just absolutely love working with me because they're like, dude, I made more money than I would have on my own by selling to you and you did all the work. Isn't that pretty much a no-brainer? Like if you can do less work, way less work and make more money. So I made it into as much of a no-brainer offer as I could. And so that's what I, and I'll rewind just real quick with a point on that as well, is that another time where I got greedy essentially is I was doing that with just one guy. One guy was sending me a lot of deals. He does tons of business in St. Louis. This is kind of when I first got started. It was after I had done a couple fix and flips, but this is 11, 12 years ago. I was still pretty new, relatively new in real estate. And he would just send me deals and then I would email them out. Weren't texting deals back then or anything. I'd email them out and I started selling properties for him. And that worked really well. I had no seller advertising or anything like that. That's also still when my personal expenses were very low. I'm making 4, 5, 8,000. I remember one thinking it wasn't going to close because I was making 15,000 on it. Like now I don't think anything of it. Back then I was like, I'm making all these small checks, like these 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. I'm making these smaller ones. And I was like, man, I'm going to try to push it. And so I made like 15. And I remember like thinking, this isn't going to close. Like I'm making way too much money on this. And, of course it closed. And sorry, I'm going a little off topic, but I did well with that. And then I got greedy and I was like, why don't I do my own seller advertising? Because this other guy who's bringing me deals, he's making money on these. So the $5,000 or whatever he's making on it, if I just do seller advertising, then I don't have to split, I'm not sharing any of these profits. And that was another time where I realized just like with rehabs, don't like them. I also didn't like doing seller advertising and talking with the homeowners and everything and trying to get like the lowest price I possibly could from, someone who'd be like your grandparents who've lived in the house for 50 years and I'm trying to negotiate them to the lowest possible point and everything. And so I just didn't like it. And once again, that was another time where my expenses shot through the roof and I stopped doing what I was previously doing because I'm just going to work on my own deals. So my expenses went way up and revenue went down and had to pivot back to what I'm doing. So there's been a lot of times in my journey where I've had to pivot and switch a little bit of what I'm doing, continue with it, don't give up, not giving up, grinding through it, but making small adjustments to what I'm doing to figure out what's working. And then my biggest challenge, because I like change, I like new things. I like new challenges and everything. My biggest challenge right now is just sticking with it because I'm like, oh, I've already mastered that, like on to the next thing. And no, it's working really well. So you should probably just stick with it. So that's my biggest challenge essentially, is just doing what I'm already doing.
Let me say back what you just said there. So in real estate, there's a lot of niches in real estate, right? So just some large areas, there's landlording, right? Holding rentals, wholesaling, which is just quick touches, right? Connecting the dots. And there's rehabs, right? Buy, fix, sell, retail. So these are three main worlds that we have. And then you picked one of those, so a niche, but then you did a niche in the niche, right? Yeah. The riches are in the niches. And that's where you were. You think wholesaling, you think of, oh, okay, I'll do the whole world of wholesaling. But inside that, you even said, okay, you do that front facing, I'll do this side. And you built a pretty awesome machine able to do that. So, that's me just reframing what you said there. So in your process, you started coaching a little bit, didn't you?
Yeah, I have done, coaching and to your point with that too, I do think just get really, really good at one thing. So when you say the niches, the more you can kind of niche it down, even the better, and just get really, really good at what that is. Don't worry about the 50 things. You don't have to have 20 different strategies that you're trying to do. Get really, really, really good. Be the best at one thing. And, it's typically going to work out pretty well for you. So just to comment on that real quick, because I agree 100% with the niches thing that you're saying. So I started coaching because mainly I did want to help people. I genuinely like helping people. And I'm like, okay, I have something that was working. So I called it buyer first wholesaling because it was wholesaling without seller advertising. Exactly, kind of what I do. That's what I, kind of promoted it as, and had, decent success as far as selling the coaching. So I did, pretty well with that. The thing that I disliked about it was the actual coaching component. So I liked the concept and I liked coming up with presentations. I liked speaking about it and how it worked and everything. I didn't like all of the, day to day. I just think for, my personality type, it just wasn't a great fit for me. I also I would go way over what I would promise. And so there were a couple things with that. It got me burnout. So I had a Voxer. I don't know if you know Voxer. It's a walkie-talkie app. So you can just send voice messages. It's kind of like voicemails, I guess, but it's like a walkie-talkie. And so I gave them access to, Voxer. I'm like, hey, anytime you have a question, go onto Voxer and just press that little button, send me a voice message with it and I'll get back to you and I'll, do that. And I was thinking, oh yeah, this will save me time by doing Voxer versus having to jump on calls all the time and everything. So I thought it was going to save me time, but I think I was supposed to agree that once per day, I'd go on and answer anybody's questions. I couldn't do that. So they would ask a question, I would answer it, and then they'd send me another Voxer with a follow-up question, to that. And so I'm just answering questions all day. And a lot of it, which obviously everybody starts from somewhere, right? And they hired a coach for that reason because they don't know what they're doing and they want help with it. But some of the questions I just got frustrated with answering that to me, who had been in it for a while, I'm like, this is the easiest, most basic, question. And I just felt like I was constantly answering those and I couldn't say no whenever they needed help. I just always wanted to be there for them. And so I got very burnout on doing it because I'm like, I can't run my own wholesaling business because I'm doing 95% of the work for a dozen other people's wholesaling business. And so if I ever did it again, I definitely would have to do it in a different way, and set clear boundaries and whatnot. But my students did have success. I had students that did. Sometimes I had to, kind of drag them across the finish line to get the deals done. But I went into it with the intention of like being able to help people out. I found something, a niche that works pretty well for me. I want to be able to share that knowledge with I want to help other people out. I want them to experience, the freedom of being your own boss, being a business owner and being able to make pretty good money. I wanted that so badly for other people. And I gave too much of myself, I think, in that process. And so that's what kind of led me to just steer away from it. Is I truly just got like burnout, and I felt like I was, and that's something that I messed up too. I've learned since then that asking kind of powerful questions can help them think through the solution on their own. And obviously I'm still there to tell them, like, if they come up with a solution and it's like, no, that's a really bad thing to do. Like, I'm of course going to tell them, but, that's the way that true coaching is done, because they're actually growing. What I would do, the wrong way to do it, is that I would just answer, like, this is what I would do. This is what I do. This is what I would do. This is what I would do. That's what I just constantly did. And I trained them to like, hey, anytime I have any sort of question, I'm just going to go because he's going to tell me exactly what to do. And so I wasn't helping anyone. I was burning myself out, and I wasn't helping them to like think through solutions, on their own, because, they're only going to be here for so long. Like, various coaching programs had different time frames on them. And so I was doing kind of an injustice to them as well. While they were making money, though, they were closing the deals, with my help. I wasn't doing the right things for their long-term success, I guess. So yeah, I got burnt out, and I haven't done coaching in a few years now. It's something I occasionally think about every once in a while, but I don't feel a strong urge towards that right now. And, maybe that will change over time. But that's kind of my experience had been through coaching.
So, a lot of the people that have been on here, myself included, have a coaching component, right? And you think it's going to be, man, if I would have had me when I was younger, my gosh, I would have, you know what I mean? So you try to be that. And then, they just keep taking and don't always give back, or realize how much they're draining, and it actually pulls you from your business, especially if that's what, like in the stuff that I do, it's more like, hey, I think everybody should be in real estate, right? That has this drive, but it's one of those like, how about you start? Here's some information. You start, and I'm here once you get, like, I'll help you do it, but you got to bring something to the table, So if you're young or just breaking in, it's like, hey, if you have a deal or something, people will help you even outside of a coaching program if you have a deal.
Yeah, and there's people like me too, right? Like you find me a deal, like I'm happy to pay you a nice finder's fee, and I'll, kind of walk you through it and help you sell it, because the only thing is, like, with what you just said there is there has to be something in it for them. So, if someone like us, who we've done a lot of real estate deals, if we, every time someone was like, hey, can I pick your brain, on something, and they weren't offering anything of value, that's all we would do. And most of the time, it's unfortunate, but most of the time they're going to take no action on what I have countless times where I'm like, I spent 2 hours going over exactly like the plan that someone should do for free. This is not a coaching student, but just like wanting to help people. And they either do something completely different or just don't take any action. And you just feel like you wasted your time. You're like, I gave everything I had, right? Like, I gave you all the knowledge that I possibly could, and you didn't do anything with it, or you did something completely opposite of what I said. So I just preface that with, people will help for sure. Just make sure there's, some value in it for them. Like, if you haven't done a deal and you're really interested in real estate investing, and you're like, oh, this person's successful, tell them, I'll bird dog for you for free. I'll find deals for you for free. I just want to, kind of learn a little bit along the way, but I will do all the work and you don't have to pay me. That's something that I'm like, cool. Yeah. Like if you want to find me properties, awesome. I'm happy to help you out if you're providing value. That's just preface that with like, if you are just getting started and you know, to get help, try to provide some value in some way to the other person.
But in this process, right, the highs, the lows, is there any advice you would have given? I mean, you've mentioned a few of them. Younger Justin or somebody like you that really is either getting started or kind of restarting in a sense, because you've had a couple versions of that. Do you have any advice to those people?
Yeah. First thing I would say is like, it's never as easy as it seems. It never is. There's always going to be a lot more hurdles than you anticipate. And you got to be ready for a roller coaster. So just like kind of be prepared for that. There's going to be a lot of highs. There's going to be a lot of lows. That's just kind of what you're signing up for. If you just want to go work for somebody else and have a 2 job and you punch in at 9 and clock out at 5 and you don't think about work, that's 100% fine. There's a lot of people out there in the world needs that. So there's nothing wrong with that. But if you do have any of that motivation to be an entrepreneur, just know that like there are going to be a lot of highs and there's going to be a lot of lows. And when the lows happen, you just got to push through and also like just figure out like something that works and try to repeat that. So you're going to stumble over things that like, oh, that actually worked decently well. Like, okay, how do I repeat that? How can I replicate that kind of over and over again? So you just, through the rough times, like you just have to push through and have faith that, eventually you're going to get to where you want to get to. Something I mentioned earlier too, at least for me personally, what I wish I would have done is just started buying rentals earlier. I wish I would have, because as I mentioned, if I got 15-year notes on properties and I've been doing this for 13 years, I'd almost own these things free and clear already. And I could have, 10, 20, 50 properties owned free and clear, which that's real retirement. Like you can truly retire at that point. And so I wish I would have done that. But yeah, I said, it's not always going to be easy. It's always going to be harder than you think it is. And you just have to listen to that like inner voice telling you to like keep pushing through. Put on the Rocky theme song and
yeah, that's right.
Just, you can get through it. Which, by the way, you think about, like, for instance, the Rocky movie, and there's always highs and lows with that. And, like, you think about the training montage, and he's, like, working like crazy to get to even the stage, to get to even the ring to fight. Not even know if he's going to win, but he puts in the work and the effort. And so you got to do that. Put in the work, put in the effort. Another thing that I would say, too, is for a lot of people is don't overanalyze, analysis by paralysis. You just have to get out there and do it. Obviously, try to mitigate your risk as much as you can whenever you're buying a property or starting a company. Do some research, learn at least the basics, try to mitigate risk. Maybe that's, if you're buying a fix and flip, for instance, talk to an agent beforehand. That's going to give you a real ARV. And if you don't know what that means, after repair value, basically what the property is going to be worth after it's fixed up. Get real numbers, get advice from, an agent who's experienced with that. So you can mitigate risk, but you got to take action. You got to do something. You're never going to get anywhere unless you take imperfect action. And that's not to say to so you take this imperfect action and then you realize like you're going to fail with certain things. Like, oh man, I should have done this. Like I did that incorrectly. It's just a learning experience. So you tweak and tweak and tweak. And that's where I've kind of got to this point where I've tweaked the system so much that it does run really well. It's good. It's almost like boring because I'm doing the same thing, but it works. It works really well, but I've had to fine tune that over time. So get out there, take action, and then just improve. When something doesn't go exactly how you want, figure out how to fix that and how to do better next time. And you make these minor adjustments over and over and over and over again. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I've got a pretty successful business.
Justin, that's fantastic. I know you got to go, but man, thank you for jumping on, sharing some wisdom with us today. Appreciate you and all the stuff that you've done. You really are one of the good guys out there. And it is interesting to hear your advice. You're basically saying find your lane and then stay in your lane. Be boring, and then you could do other things outside of that, right? You don't need to be a coach to coach people. People are attracted and want to work with you. Don't be a taker, be a giver, like this type of mentality. Like, dude, Smart stuff. I didn't know about that $100,000 loss. Dude, that sucks.
It was quite the year. I think that maybe led to some of like the heroin.
That's where this came from. Well, dude, it's great catching up with you. Love having the chat. So I'll let you go there and be a dad today. So thank you so much, Justin, for being with us.
I appreciate it, man. Kevin, and for any listeners who don't know Kevin in real life in person, like what you see is what he actually is. Like he's a genuinely amazing person. He's always like has a smile on his face, and like he's a tremendous person. So keep tuning in because he's one of the real ones. He's a good guy.
Yes. I don't even have to pay you for that. That's awesome.
I'll invoice you later.
Yeah, here's the bill. Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it.
I love it. I love talking with Justin. He's a good dude. If you don't know this, I do take notes through the show. I use this Remarkable. It's called Remarkable 2. I used to have bunches of notebooks. Now I just use this. It keeps all my notes, all my sermon notes, any conversation with coaching students or properties. I love it. It's one area I could text out, I could email it, etc. So let's look at some of our notes from talking with Justin. So one, I love this idea because a lot of people think you say, hey, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Hey, I'm getting into real estate. I'm now a millionaire, right? That's something you just think of. It took him 12 months to do his first deal. When he restarted later, it took him several months before he got a paycheck. You know, people don't talk about that. They think if you turn the light switch, you get paid. It's a process. You got to be able to have control or healthy habits during that process to make sure you're still doing those items to make that money, right? There's lead indicator and lag indicator. So understanding the fact that it doesn't happen right away. Gosh, on properties, we talk about, I had it 3 months, 6 months, but you don't necessarily always know, like I'm paying $3,000 a month just in holding costs, plus utilities, plus rehabs. So think of if you do have all this money and then you buy a house and then you have to pay for all these things, the longer you hold it, it does drop down your profit. It does kind of totally go into the gut there of like, my gosh, will I ever get paid? And then it's not anything you're truly happy or excited about, but sometimes a lot of us have used those credit cards to bridge the gap from bankruptcy or struggle to basically able to get the deal. Sometimes you have to pay your way to get through it. Man, I did not know he lost $100,000 on a deal. Dude, that is nuts. But the fact that you can take those losses and you only lose if you just stop, right? That's when you totally stop and just through the process of doing it. But man, through his storyline, he was talking about this path and he would start veering off and doing a little bit on each side, doing different parts of the business. And in a sense, the more he stays kind of boring, right in his lane there is when it's just his strike zone. It all works. He's making money, is able to help, in a sense, kind of coaching the people through the process. And it's good for him, his family, and all the people in the process. So guys, I love what Justin's been doing. The fact that he's honest about it. Hey, I did coaching. Guess what? It burns me out. I love helping people, but it's a time suck, right? It just burns you out and you're not able to do the stuff that's actually producing. So I love the fact that he actually brings that up because that is real stuff. So guys, I hope you enjoyed Justin Van Riper as much as I do, and we'll see you next time. Peace.